There's been at least an inch of snow and slush and ice on the grounds in New York for over a month. It's disgusting out, so I asked Brendan to show us a great winter recipe, and he decided to teach us how to make braised short ribs.
This week on Working Class Foodies.
Short ribs are just something that's in my family that is just a classic. It's a staple. You get a lot of flavor, you know, out of one of the cheapest cuts of meat. One thing you gotta know about short ribs, first and foremost, is that they're gonna reduce by almost 40%, 40–50%. What you really want to do is make sure you're getting very, very meaty cuts. It's good to have some fat, but you don't want a big brick of fat. It's just gonna render off and you're gonna lose a bunch of meat. I prefer to cook with the bone because the bone is just gonna add to your stock. They've been seared off, the marrow is gonna get in there, and you're gonna create a beautiful beef stock. We're gonna do our veg prep first. I'm going very rustic here because this is just all going into a braise. So we're just gonna sear them off, get the flavor, and strain it out later. So we got our carrots. You know, you wanna get your vegetables done first, and then you can come to the protein. If you do your protein first, you run the risk of cross-contamination. Do some garlic. What I like to do is I'll get a pot going nice and hot. Always put your olive oil in or your canola oil in while your pan is cold. You can do this while your pan's just getting hot. Just kind of season up the meat, a lot of salt and pepper. You can always add more to it if you want to do a dry rub, onion powder, garlic powder, paprika, ancho peppers, a little bit of salt and sugar. You don't want it to have too much sugar in it because then it will just burn. Pat down the meat on pretty much most of the sides except for the bone. Once your oil kind of starts rippling, like a breeze on a lake, you can take your meat and just drop it in. And if you get that nice sear sound, you know you're doing all right. Just get like a sear on each side so they get like a nice little browning. Pull the meat out and let it rest after you've like seared all the sides except for the bone. I don't want any of that really black stuff because that's just bitterness. So I'm gonna actually get that out of there, but I'm gonna let it separate the oil a little bit and I'm gonna use some of the infused oil. And then take your vegetables and put your carrots in first. A little pinch of salt. And I'll just add our celery and garlic. And then your onions. Once the vegetables are cooked off, I like to add in a little bit of chopped tomato. And just let the tomato cook for a minute. And then put in your red wine or your beer. I prefer beer when it comes to red meat, but totally your preference again. And just let that cook down. What's the fun in cooking if you're not drinking? And then you can return the meat. And then add your stock or your water. And if you don't have enough to cover, you just add a little water. Make sure your stock and your water is not cold, like just out of the fridge. You want to make sure it's at least room temperature or warm. And then cover it with a little bit of an opening. Once it comes up to a simmer, reduce the heat to keep that simmer so it doesn't go to a rapid boil, and just let it go until it's fork tender. If you're doing 4 or 5 pieces, it could take 2 hours. If you're doing 8 pieces, it can take 3 hours. It's worth the process, because if you do that the whole day before, the next day, you're gonna be totally happy you did it.
We're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, it's time to finish off and serve up our short ribs.
When the short ribs are done, I like to pull them out and let them just like rest on a plate, or let them rest. Then what I'll do with the braising liquid is actually strain it into another pot, strain the fat off. You can use a ladle or a spoon to do that. So what we have here is just kind of a small amount of that, and we're reducing it down, most of the fat strained off, all the veg out, and we're just going to tighten that up and get it down to a point where it's like a nice pan sauce, like a nice reduction. And if it becomes a little too bitter, like almost acidic from the fortification, from the wine or the beer, you can always add like a cap full of vinegar, and it will actually help balance out the acidity. If you're doing red wine or beer, you can go red wine vinegar, sherry vinegar.
Right.
White wine vinegar. Not that you would really use that with short ribs.
Right.
But yeah, you can just use a matching vinegar or something close enough, and the acidity should actually help balance. It won't always save it, but it can balance it out. And then you just pour that over top. If you are doing it the next day, let the meat cool, cover it in plastic, get your liquid, reduced by half. And, the next day what you can do is just reheat the liquid, reconstitute the meat till it gets nice and soft. And if you want to thicken it up a little bit, you can add a little bit of flour if you want, and then pour it on top. Once you're done with the whole thing, you can save a quart of it, let it cool, put it in your freezer, and you'll have a really great stock to cook with later. We served it with some olive oil, sweet potatoes, just boiled off sweet potato, a little bit of olive oil, some salt. And you got yourself a pretty hearty meal.
The total cost for this meal came down to $36, but it made about 6 portions, so that's $6 a portion. If you've got a great short ribs recipe or a favorite hearty winter dish, let us know. Share it in the comments below. And we'll see you next week on Working Class Foodies. Check out some of our other episodes to find recipes that would go great with this dish by clicking any of these boxes around my face.